Something happened this week and you almost missed it. It was not a big moment. Nobody would have noticed it from the outside. You were doing something small, making coffee, driving somewhere, scrolling through your phone at 10:30 at night, and a thought about him passed through you the way thoughts do. And you noticed almost as an afterthought that you did not reach for your phone. You did not check. You did not feel the familiar pull to know where he was or what he was doing or whether today was the day something might change. You just kept making the coffee, and then, a few seconds later, it hit you. Not the missing him. The absence of the missing him. Later that same day, or maybe it was the next one, you noticed it again. A song came on that used to undo you completely, the kind of song you would have had to turn off in the early months because it hurt too much to hear all the way through. This time you let it play. You noticed the ache was there, somewhere underneath, but it did not rise up and take over the whole room the way it used to. It sat quietly in the background like weather you were aware of, but no longer organizing your whole day around. You did not want him back the way you did. Not gone completely, not erased, but different, quieter, less like a hunger and more like a fact you know about yourself. Distant and settled, the way you know your own birthday or the name of a street you used to live on. That is what this week is. If you have felt something shift in the wanting itself, not the connection, not the memory, but the specific hunger to have him back, leave a like and subscribe so you do not lose this thread. Drop the words "the wanting is quieting" in the comments below. Because what is happening in you right now does not mean what you think it means, and almost nobody talks about this particular turning point honestly. Before we go any further, I want to put something in front of you. At a turning point like this one, general content cannot reach what you're actually asking. A twin flame union personal reading is built entirely around your chart, your name, your exact birth time, your place of birth. What returns to your inbox is a personal audio reading and written report naming exactly where you stand, what the universe is orchestrating inside this shift, and what your soul contract with him actually means underneath what you can see from inside it. If you want to understand this moment instead of feeling disoriented by it, the link is in the description below. If you want to let us talk about what is actually happening. Every piece of content about twin flame separation prepares you for the beginning. The shock, the disbelief, the nights you could not sleep because your body would not stop reaching for a person who was no longer reachable. There is an entire genre of guidance built around that stage, and for good reason, because it is loud and visible and it demands a response. Nobody prepares you for this stage, the one where the wanting itself starts to change shape. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross mapped the stages of grief more than 50 years ago, and one detail from her original work gets flattened almost every time it is repeated. She never said the stages were linear. She never said they were a staircase you climb once and finish. She described them as a landscape you move through unevenly, sometimes forward, sometimes back, sometimes hovering in one place for so long you assume you have taken up permanent residence there. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. You have been through versions of all five, probably more than once, probably out of order, probably feeling like you were failing at grief, because it did not look like the neat progression the model implies. Think back to where you started. The early months had a shape to them that at least made sense as suffering. There was denial in there somewhere, the refusal to believe the distance would actually hold. The part of you that kept expecting a text, a sign, a reversal. There was anger, sharp and sudden, arriving in moments you did not expect it. At him, at the situation, sometimes at yourself, for caring this much about someone who was not choosing you back in the way you needed. There was bargaining, the quiet negotiations you ran in your own mind, the version where, if you just healed enough, said the right things, waited the right amount of time, something would shift. There was depression, the heavy months where getting out of bed felt like an accomplishment, and the ache lived in your chest like a permanent tenant. Each of those stages, as brutal as they were, had a kind of aliveness to them. They demanded a response. They gave you something to do, even if that something was simply survive the day. This stage does not announce itself the same way. It arrives quietly, almost apologetically, in a moment as small as not reaching for your phone. But there is a specific texture to what happens deep in the acceptance stage that almost nobody names precisely, because it does not feel like acceptance while it is happening. It feels like something closer to alarm, because acceptance, in its mature form, is not resignation. It is not giving up. It is the nervous system finally metabolizing the loss instead of holding it in permanent crisis mode. And one of the first visible signs that this metabolizing has actually happened, rather than just being talked about in a journal entry, is that the wanting quiets. Not because you stopped loving him, because the specific, urgent, hour-to-hour hunger to have him back required a level of nervous system activation that your body simply could not sustain forever. Bodies are not built for permanent emergency. At some point, whether you consciously chose it or not, your system began to downshift out of crisis and into something else. That downshift is what you felt this week, standing at the counter, not reaching for your phone. It is not the end of love. It is the end of the emergency around the love. And because nobody prepares you for this, the first response most divine feminine women have when they notice it is not relief. It is fear. Here is the fear, named plainly because you deserve to have it named instead of tiptoed around. If I stop wanting him this badly, does it mean it was never real? If the hunger fades, does it mean the connection fades with it? If you can make coffee without your whole body orienting toward him, does that prove the skeptics right? The people who told you from the beginning that this was infatuation dressed up in spiritual language, that you would eventually just move on the way people move on from anything. That fear is loud. It is also, according to nearly every framework of attachment and grief psychology, based on a misunderstanding of what wanting actually is. Wanting, in its most activated form, is not a measure of love. It is a measure of unresolved nervous system threat. When something is unfinished, when the body has not been able to complete the natural cycle of reaching, connecting, and resolving, it stays in a loop of heightened wanting, because the loop itself is the body's attempt to force resolution. The wanting was never proof of the depth of the bond. The wanting was proof that your system had not yet found a way to hold the bond without needing constant contact to regulate around it. Kubler-Ross's framework was built around death, around a loss with a clear and final boundary. Twin flame separation does not offer that boundary. There is no funeral, no clear ending, no moment where the world formally acknowledges what you lost. Researchers who studied grief without that kind of boundary, loss where the person is gone from your daily life but not gone from the world, found something specific happens in cases like this. The grieving person's nervous system stays activated far longer, precisely because there is no external ritual marking closure. You had to build your own closure from the inside, slowly, without a ceremony, without permission from anyone. There is a name for the particular shape of loss you have been living inside, one researchers use for situations where a person is physically absent but still psychologically present, or the reverse, still nearby in theory but emotionally unreachable. Your version has been a strange mixture of both. He has not disappeared from the world. He is still, technically, a message away, still visible somewhere, still theoretically reachable in a way that death never allows. And yet the actual connection, the felt presence of him in your ordinary days, has been gone in every way that matters. That specific configuration of loss is one of the hardest a nervous system is asked to metabolize, because the mind cannot fully close a file the way it can with a clean ending. Part of you has been running two conflicting processes for a long time now, grieving something that feels finished while simultaneously keeping a door open in case it is not. Holding both of those realities in the body at once, for months, sometimes longer, produces exactly the kind of chronic activation you may have been calling anxiety, or restlessness, or simply the thing that would not let you fully relax, even on your better days. And that is exactly what has been happening quietly, while you thought nothing was moving. The wanting was your nervous system's way of trying to force a resolution the outside world was never going to hand you. The quieting of the wanting is what happens once your inner world finally builds a form of resolution on its own, without him, without an ending, without anyone else's help. That is not losing the connection. That is your body finally exhaling. There is something else happening underneath this stage that deserves real attention because it is easy to miss when you are focused entirely on how strange the quiet feels. Guessing where you actually stand in a journey like this one is exhausting on its own. Some weeks feel like progress. Other weeks feel like sliding straight back to where you started, and without anything to measure against, it becomes almost impossible to tell whether you are actually moving forward or simply spinning inside the same loop, dressed up as new insight. That not knowing is its own quiet drain, separate from the grief itself. A twin flame journey tracker and progress workbook exists for exactly this. Instead of relying on memory or mood to tell you where you are, you track it, which stage you are actually in this month, not last month. The synchronicities that would otherwise slip past unnoticed, whether your daily choices are coming from self-loyalty or old habit, reflections that let you look back after a few weeks and see, in your own handwriting, that the woman who wrote entry 1 is not the woman writing entry 12. When the wanting itself starts to change shape the way it has this week, having a written record of the shift matters. It turns a feeling you might otherwise doubt into something you can actually see. He does not know this shift happened in you. That is worth sitting with for a moment, because it changes how you might be tempted to interpret what happens next. Somewhere in the connection, something has been shifting on his end too, on a timeline that rarely lines up neatly with yours. Twin flame dynamics are famously asynchronous. One person moves through a stage of realization or reckoning while the other is still holding a completely different emotional posture. This is not a flaw in the connection. It is simply how two separate nervous systems process the same rupture differently, on different timelines, shaped by different histories. While your wanting has been quieting, something in him has likely been doing the opposite. This is one of the strange and consistent patterns that shows up across separation stages. As the pursuing partner's urgency softens, the partner who has been avoidant often starts to feel the absence more acutely, precisely because the pressure that gave his avoidance a function has lifted. He is not being chased anymore. And a person who has spent months organizing his defenses around not being caught by someone's longing suddenly has nothing to defend against. This is not a strategy you are running. It is not a manipulation tactic dressed up as spiritual growth. It is simply what happens, biologically and psychologically, when one person in a dynamic stops generating the specific kind of pressure the other person had built an entire identity around resisting. If he is somewhere in his own reckoning right now, he is doing it without knowing that the woman he is reckoning with has quietly become someone who is no longer waiting at the door for the outcome. That is not something you did to influence him. That is simply where you both happen to be standing. There is a particular kind of grief that belongs to him in this moment, one that is easy to overlook when you are so deep inside your own. His grief, if it is arriving now, is not the same shape as yours was. Yours had months to move through denial and anger and bargaining, in full view of your own awareness, even when you did not have language for what stage you were in. His, if it is happening, may be arriving all at once, compressed, without the luxury of time to metabolize it slowly. That is not something you need to fix or soften for him. It is simply useful to understand so that whatever happens next does not get filtered through the assumption that his process should look like yours did on your timeline, at your pace. He built a version of himself around the certainty that you would still be reaching, even quietly, even from a distance. That certainty gave shape to his choices, whether he could name it or not. What is happening now, if your shift is real and lasting rather than a temporary low, is that the ground he built his defenses on is no longer there. That is disorienting for anyone, and it produces its own grief, its own reckoning, its own version of the sleepless nights you moved through months ago. The most important thing to understand about this stage is that it does not ask you to do anything dramatic. You do not need to announce your healing. You do not need to prove to anyone, least of all yourself, that you have arrived somewhere final. This stage is not a finish line. Kubler-Ross was clear that acceptance is not the end of grief. It is simply the place where grief stops running the whole show. What this stage actually asks of you is smaller and harder than any dramatic gesture. It asks you to let the quiet be quiet, to not manufacture more wanting because the absence of wanting feels unfamiliar and a little frightening, to resist the urge to test yourself, to reach out just to see if the old ache is still there, to poke at the wound the way you might press a bruise just to confirm it still hurts. It does not need to still hurt for the love to have been real. This is the part that gets misunderstood most often in twin flame spaces. Somewhere along the way, pain became treated as proof. The more it hurt, the more real it must be. The more you wanted, the deeper the soul contract. But that equation was never true, and holding on to it now, at exactly the stage where your nervous system has finally found some rest, will only pull you backward into a version of yourself your body has already worked hard to move beyond. There are a few specific things worth watching for in yourself over the coming weeks, because this stage has its own particular ways of being hijacked. Watch for the urge to reopen contact just to see what happens. This is one of the most common ways the quiet gets disrupted before it has a chance to settle in fully. A message sent out of curiosity rather than genuine need can reignite the exact activation your system has been working so hard to move out of. And then you are back at the beginning of a cycle you have already survived once. Watch for comparing this stage to how you imagined healing would feel. Many divine feminine women expect acceptance to feel triumphant, clean, maybe even a little celebratory. When it arrives instead as quiet, almost anticlimactic, there can be a temptation to distrust it, to assume real healing must feel bigger than this. It does not. Quiet is often the truest sign that the nervous system has actually settled rather than simply gotten better at performing calm. Watch for guilt disguised as self-awareness. The version of guilt that whispers you are forgetting him, moving on too easily, betraying something sacred by simply living your life without the ache as its center. That guilt is not wisdom. It is an old alarm system still firing out of habit, long after the actual danger has passed. What actually helps instead is simple. Notice the quiet without narrating a story about what it means. Let your days be organized around your own life again, your own work, your own friendships, your own small pleasures, rather than around monitoring the state of a connection you cannot control. Keep whatever spiritual practice has carried you this far. Meditation, journaling, prayer, whatever it is, not to manufacture more insight about him, but simply because it is good for you, on your own, independent of any outcome. Let the coffee just be coffee sometimes. Let a memory of him pass through you without becoming a whole afternoon. Let the quiet mean what it actually means, which is that you survived something the early stages of this journey convinced you might be unsurvivable. You are still here, still whole, still, underneath everything, someone capable of love, just no longer someone whose entire nervous system organizes itself around proving that love through suffering. This turning point is not the absence of the connection. It is the presence of you, finally, standing in your own life without needing the ache to confirm you are still in this journey. The wanting will not stay gone forever in the sense that a soul-level bond like this rarely disappears completely. But the specific, urgent, crisis-level hunger you have been carrying does not need to define this next chapter. It got you through the hardest stretch of this journey. It served its purpose. And now, this week at the kitchen counter, not reaching for your phone, you are allowed to let it rest. That is not betrayal. That is not forgetting. That is what healing actually looks like from the inside, which is usually quieter, less dramatic, and far less certain of itself than anyone prepares you for. You are at a turning point. Let it be quiet. Let it be yours. Let it be, finally, Something that does not require proving to anyone, including the part of you that is still a little afraid of what the quiet means. It means you made it here. That is enough.